There are experiences unfolding within you that you cannot articulate to anyone around you. Patterns too precise and purposeful to be dismissed as coincidence. Dreams that feel more vivid and real than your waking hours. Knowledge arriving without any process of learning. Sensing things before they materialize in the world. Carl Jung devoted his entire career to investigating these phenomena with the rigor of a scientist and the courage of an explorer. And he arrived at a discovery so startling it shook the very foundations of depth psychology. These aren't symptoms of losing your mind. They are evidence of finding yourself. Today, I'll unveil the 5 profound experiences Jung identified that only manifest in spiritually awakened individuals. Experiences so specific, so undeniable, that once you recognize them, you'll understand precisely where you are in your awakening journey. And if you're living through these experiences right now, you'll finally understand why you feel so profoundly alone in them. It's not because something is broken in you. It's because you're conscious in ways that most people around you haven't yet become. And that gap, that distance between what you now perceive and what others still can't see, is real. It's not your imagination. It's the cost of waking up before the world around you does. Here's what transforms everything you thought you understood about psychological growth. Jung discovered that spiritual awakening isn't simply a shift in perspective or a gradual change in worldview. It activates dormant psychological functions that have been lying in a kind of profound slumber within the human psyche. Capacities sleeping in the collective unconscious, waiting for the right internal conditions to come alive. These aren't poetic metaphors or mystical abstractions designed to comfort people who feel different. They're observable psychological phenomena that fundamentally alter how you perceive and experience reality from the inside out. And once activated, these capacities cannot be switched off. You cannot unlearn what you have become. The first experience will resonate immediately if you're truly in the midst of awakening. Jung coined the term synchronicity, but the vast majority of people completely misunderstand what he actually intended by it. It's not simply about meaningful coincidences scattered across your week that occasionally make you pause. It's what Jung described as an acausal connecting principle, reality itself beginning to communicate with you through patterns that defy any logical explanation. This is something fundamentally different from what most people imagine when they first encounter the concept. Here's what only genuinely awakened people experience. Synchronicities cease being occasional surprises that make you stop and wonder for a moment. They transform into a constant, flowing dialogue between you and the fabric of existence itself. You think of someone, and they reach out to you within minutes, as though the thought traveled across the distance between you and arrived before any physical signal could. You carry a question in your mind, unspoken, unshared, and a complete stranger passes by and mentions the exact answer without knowing you needed it. You encounter repeating numerical sequences, 1111, 333, 444, not once in a while, but multiple times across every single day, in places too varied and too precisely timed to be explained away. Books seem to open themselves to the precise passage your soul requires in that exact moment. Songs begin playing that carry messages speaking directly into the center of your current situation, as though chosen specifically and deliberately for you by something that knows your life. Jung documented this phenomenon extensively throughout his own awakening process. He wrote that synchronicities are not random occurrences scattered across an indifferent universe. They are the universe becoming conscious of itself through the individual who has developed enough capacity to perceive what was always being transmitted. But here's the discovery he made that reshapes everything we assume about the nature of reality. Synchronicities only intensify for those whose consciousness has crossed a particular threshold. It's like finally tuning into a radio frequency that was always broadcasting across all of time to anyone capable of receiving it. The signal was always there. You simply hadn't yet developed the receiver. One of Jung's patients, a highly rational scientist with no previous interest in spiritual matters and a deep professional commitment to empirical thinking, described the shift with striking clarity. He said he used to inhabit a world governed entirely by cause and effect, by measurable outcomes and logical sequences. Then something changed in him, slowly at first, and then all at once, and he found himself living in a world saturated with meaning and connection. Every day felt like reality was conducting an intimate conversation with him through events that appeared entirely random to everyone else, but were anything but random to him. A billboard would answer the question he had been holding silently since that morning. A particular bird would appear at the precise moment he needed confirmation of a decision he was wrestling with. His late grandmother's favorite song would begin playing through a nearby speaker at the exact moment he was navigating a choice she would have guided him through when she was alive. But here's the dimension that only genuinely awakened people truly comprehend. You cannot manufacture synchronicities. The moment you attempt to force them into existence or try to use them to serve the ego's desires for validation or advantage, they dissolve and go silent. They flow freely only when you are aligned with what Jung called the self, your deepest, most authentic truth beneath all the conditioning and performance. It's as though reality itself possesses the ability to sense when you're being genuine versus when you're performing a version of yourself for some external purpose. The universe responds to authentic inner alignment in ways it simply does not respond to pretense or manipulation. This creates a particular kind of profound loneliness that is difficult to describe to anyone who hasn't felt it. How do you communicate to another person that reality is literally speaking to you? That you're not seeing signs everywhere because something has gone wrong with your perception, but because you've developed enough consciousness to perceive the interconnected web Jung called the unus mundus, the unified field that underlies all of existence without exception. Most people will assume you're either fabricating the experiences or that something has gone wrong in your mind. They'll suggest you're finding patterns that simply aren't there, that you're engaged in magical thinking, that you're projecting meaning onto what is only randomness. And you cannot prove them wrong because synchronicities cannot be demonstrated on command. They aren't performances staged for a skeptical audience. They are private communications flowing between you and something vast and, apparently, responsive. Jung was unambiguous about this dimension of the experience. The privilege of expanded consciousness is simultaneously its most difficult burden. You perceive what others cannot, and this perception separates you from those who remain in unconscious patterns. Synchronicities become your secret language with reality, beautiful, profound, deeply nourishing, and utterly isolating all at the same time. But the second experience is even more transformative, and it's perhaps Jung's most important discovery that receives the least honest attention in modern spiritual conversations. The transcendent function is not transcendence in the sense of spiritual bypassing or floating comfortably above the difficulties of ordinary human life. It's a specific psychological capacity that only emerges in individuals who have genuinely awakened. The ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously in the same moment without any need to choose between them. To inhabit paradox without requiring it to resolve into something simpler or more comfortable. Here is what this actually means in lived experience. While everyone around you remains trapped in either-or thinking, this or that, right or wrong, spiritual or material, logical or emotional, you begin to experience something categorically different. You find yourself capable of holding both possibilities in the same moment without internal contradiction. You can feel profound grief and deep joy simultaneously, not alternating between them depending on your focus, but experiencing both with equal fullness in the same breath. You can perceive someone's most luminous divine essence and their darkest human shadow at exactly the same time, without needing to resolve the tension into a single judgment. You can know with complete conviction that life is both utterly without inherent meaning and infinitely meaningful. And you can hold both recognitions simultaneously without your mind demanding that one of them surrender to the other. Jung wrote that the transcendent function serves as the bridge between the conscious mind and the unconscious depths. It allows opposing forces to generate a third thing, not a compromise that weakens both, not a balance that neutralizes both, but an entirely new creation that carries the essential truth of both positions while transcending what either could have become alone. This is alchemical thinking applied directly to the living structure of the psyche. Before the transcendent function fully activates, you exist in categories, choosing sides, defending positions, needing the world to be organized into recognizable containers. After it comes alive within you, you become all of the opposing categories simultaneously. You transform into what Jung called a living paradox, a psyche capable of containing contradictions that would tear an ordinary, unprepared mind apart at the seams. One of Jung's patients described the moment this capacity first came fully alive for her. It felt, she said, as though her mind had suddenly grown vast enough to hold everything that previously seemed incompatible. She could experience her mother's death as the most devastating loss that had ever occurred to her, and, simultaneously, as the most profound gift she had ever received. Not balanced against each other in some careful emotional ratio, not alternating in their truthfulness depending on her mood on any given day, but both fully, simultaneously, equally true, existing together in a psyche that had become large enough to contain them without needing them to make conventional sense. This is the precise reason awakened people often seem deeply contradictory or confusing to those around them. You can be profoundly spiritual while remaining completely grounded in ordinary reality, fully present in the immediate moment while perceiving patterns across dimensions of time, absolutely committed to a direction while remaining totally surrendered to whatever actually unfolds. To the linear either-or mind, you appear inconsistent, but you are not confused. You are comprehensive in a way that linear thinking simply cannot accommodate. The transcendent function also manifests as spontaneous wisdom that arrives without any traceable process of reasoning leading to it. Solutions to what seemed like genuinely impossible problems simply appear in awareness, fully formed and ready to be applied. You know things without any path you can point to that explains how you came to know them. Creative insights arrive complete, like transmissions received rather than constructions built. Jung called this the collaborative creation between the conscious mind and the unconscious, a co-creative process that only becomes possible when the transcendent function has built its bridge across what was previously an uncrossable internal divide. But here's the challenge that nobody in spiritual communities discusses honestly enough. Once the transcendent function fully activates within you, genuine participation in most ordinary human conflicts becomes nearly impossible. Arguments depend entirely on choosing a side and defending it. Drama requires you to cast yourself as either victim or villain in someone else's narrative. Political and ideological discourse demands that you select a tribe and demonstrate your loyalty to it. But you now see the truth embedded in all positions simultaneously. You recognize that every perspective, without exception, carries both genuine wisdom and genuine blindness. This makes you effectively useless to anyone seeking to recruit you to their particular cause. You are too deeply aware of complexity for simplistic stories, too conscious of paradox for rigid ideologies that depend on their adherents being unable to see outside them. You become what Jung described as psychologically unemployable by any system that requires true believers who cannot afford the luxury of nuance. And this awareness leads directly into the third experience. Everyone on earth dreams. But Jung discovered that in truly awakened individuals, the very nature and quality of dreaming undergoes a fundamental transformation that ordinary dream psychology has no adequate framework for describing. Dreams cease to function as random neural processing or simple wish fulfillment and become what he called direct communications from the self, transmissions from the deepest layer of wisdom available to the human psyche. Here's precisely what changes. Your dreams begin to carry a quality of lucidity without any deliberate practice to achieve it. Not lucid in the conventional sense of consciously controlling the dream narrative and bending it to your preferences, but lucid in the sense of being fully, consciously present while the dream unfolds around and through you. You are simultaneously the dreamer generating the imagery, the dream itself as it moves through its own logic, and the witness, observing everything from a position of quiet, clear awareness. You receive teachings in these states, genuine, transmissible knowledge. Initiations that feel ancient and carry the weight of something sacred. Guidance so specific and precise that you remember it word for word upon waking, sometimes for years or decades afterward. Jung documented his own experience with this transformation in extraordinary depth throughout his Red Book, the private journal of his inner life that he kept for more than a decade and that remained hidden from public view for most of the 20th century. He wrote that his dreams ceased to function as dreams in any conventional sense and became visions. Not hallucinations produced by a disturbed or deteriorating psyche, but genuine communications arising from depths of the psyche that open themselves only to those who have cultivated the psychological capacity to receive what is being offered. But here is what only the genuinely awakened experience in the dream state. Prophetic dreams that actually manifest in waking life with a precision that goes far beyond any symbolic interpretation. You dream of conversations that then occur verbatim days or weeks later. The exact words, the exact setting, sometimes even the exact clothing. You encounter the faces of people you have never met, who then appear in your waking life exactly as you dreamed them, in circumstances that match the dream with unsettling accuracy. You receive clear warnings that protect you from real-world situations before those situations have any chance to develop. Solutions to complex problems arrive in the dream state, encoded in symbols that make immediate, perfect sense upon waking, as though the answer was waiting for you in a language only the dreaming mind can read. One of Jung's patients, a businessman with no spiritual background whatsoever and no framework for interpreting what was happening to him, described his experience with a mixture of wonder and unease. He began having dreams that came true, not symbolically, not in the general thematic sense that dream interpretation usually works with, literally. He dreamed of receiving a phone call from his brother about their father's heart attack 3 days before it occurred, down to the time of day, the specific words his brother used on the call, the particular quality of silence before the news came. He dreamed the precise conversation with his employer about a promotion, the exact setting of the office, his employer's specific words, even the color and pattern of the tie the man was wearing, a full week before that conversation took place in waking life. He couldn't share any of this with anyone in his ordinary life. They would have assumed he was losing his grip on consensus reality. But he wasn't predicting the future through some extraordinary psychic gift he'd suddenly developed. He was, in his own carefully chosen words, remembering it, as though he had already lived it somewhere else, in some other layer of time, and the dream was simply the memory surfacing. Even more extraordinary are what Jung specifically termed big dreams. Dreams of such overwhelming numinous power that they permanently alter the trajectory of an entire life. These are not ordinary dreams you bring to therapy to extract personal meaning from. They are initiatory experiences that transform you at levels far deeper than thought or emotion can easily reach. You wake from them fundamentally different from the person who lay down to sleep. You have been somewhere that had no coordinates in ordinary space. You have encountered something that existed before any language you possess for describing it. You have undergone an ordeal in a space that felt more real, more saturated with genuine significance than any physical location you have ever occupied in waking life. These dreams are ultimately incommunicable, and this incommunicability is itself a defining marker of the experience. You can describe them, sometimes in beautiful and evocative language that captures certain surface qualities, but you cannot transmit their essence to someone who hasn't had access to the same depths. The dreams carry what Jung called the numinous, the holy, the sacred, a presence that commands both awe and something close to reverence that has no comfortable name in contemporary secular language. You might attempt to share these experiences with people you trust, only to encounter the polite nod, the careful look, the subtle withdrawal from genuine engagement. What they cannot grasp is that you are not interpreting symbols and finding them meaningful. You are receiving direct transmission. The dreams are not metaphors standing in for your waking life. They are more real than your waking life. This creates a profound internal division. Your dream life begins to carry more meaning, more texture, more genuine encounter than your daylight hours. You approach sleep not as rest, but as reunion, a return to depths of reality that remain unavailable to ordinary waking consciousness. Now, the final two experiences are the most demanding to integrate into the fabric of ordinary daily life. And if you're moving through these phenomena, reality speaking through synchronicities, holding paradox without fracturing, dreaming in transmissions, you are not imagining any of it. You are perceiving something genuinely real. There is a fundamental difference between imagination and perception. Jung spent the entirety of his professional life documenting and insisting upon exactly that distinction. The fourth experience represents Jung's most radical insight, one that contemporary spirituality consistently misunderstands in ways that can cause genuine harm to people in the middle of it. Awakening does not destroy the ego. It destroys the ego's monopoly on consciousness. What Jung described as the ego-self axis, the living, dynamic relationship between your everyday personality and your deepest essential nature, undergoes a complete and irreversible reorganization. The ego doesn't vanish. Something far stranger and more interesting occurs. You begin to experience yourself as multiple, simultaneous centers of consciousness, each real, each valid, each occupying a different level of what you are. There is the you that goes to work, manages obligations, maintains relationships, has preferences and opinions, and a recognizable history. But there is also what Jung called the self, a vast, impersonal awareness quietly observing your entire life unfold as though watching a deeply personal film from a position of unshakable equanimity. And you inhabit both of these simultaneously, fully. Neither one is more essentially you than the other. Jung wrote that the experience of the self is always, in some essential sense, a defeat for the ego. But he was careful about what he actually meant. He didn't mean the ego vanishes or ceases to matter. He meant it discovers, through direct, undeniable experience rather than intellectual acceptance of a concept, that it is not the supreme authority it had always assumed itself to be. It's not the CEO of consciousness. It's middle management, competent, necessary, valuable in its domain, but not the source or the origin of what is most essentially you. This discovery is simultaneously the most humiliating and the most profoundly liberating realization the human psyche can undergo. Here is what only the genuinely awakened experience in this territory. You can be fully present in a conversation, emotionally engaged, intellectually active, entirely there, while simultaneously observing yourself from a perspective completely outside the interaction. This is not dissociation. It is not fragmentation. It is full presence from multiple perspectives at once. Perspectives that would have seemed mutually exclusive before this shift occurred. You watch yourself beginning to get triggered and choose whether to allow that internal movement to determine your response. You observe your own established patterns beginning to play out in real time and step outside them mid-sentence, mid-reaction, choosing differently. One of Jung's patients described living what she called a split-screen existence. On one screen, she was a fully particular person, someone with a specific history, a distinct personality, clearly defined preferences, a life she recognized as her own. On the other screen, she was infinite awareness, temporarily inhabiting a human form and calling it by her name. Neither screen was more real or more valid than the other. She wasn't choosing between them or trying to merge them into something more internally comfortable. She was simply living as both simultaneously. It was, she said, both maddening and miraculous in proportions that kept shifting, and she would not have traded the experience for the simpler comfort of what she had been before. The ego doesn't yield its position gracefully or permanently. It resists with what Jung called inflation, moments where it attempts to claim the self's experiences as personal achievements and proof of special status above ordinary human beings. The universe responds, reliably and without exception, with what Jung called compensation. Humbling experiences that arrive precisely when the ego has overreached, reminding you with gentle or not so gentle insistence that you are simultaneously boundless and utterly, endearingly ordinary. You might access genuine wisdom in one exchange and say something completely thoughtless in the next. You'll feel a quality of inner completeness and then find yourself acting out an old shadow pattern in ways that embarrass you. This is not failure. This is the ongoing, lived negotiation between ego and self that defines what awakened life actually looks like in practice. The fifth experience is perhaps the strangest of all, and certainly the most difficult to communicate to someone who hasn't begun living it themselves. This is Jung's most consistently misunderstood concept, and modern spirituality has done very little to clarify what he actually meant. Living mythologically has nothing to do with treating your life as a fairy tale or retreating from the demands of reality into fantasy and narrative comfort. It means coming into full conscious recognition that you are simultaneously living a personal, particular, historically specific life and enacting universal patterns that Jung called archetypes, patterns that have been playing out through human experience since the very beginning of our existence as a species capable of self-reflection. You become aware, gradually and then with sudden, unmistakable clarity, that your individual story is simultaneously a cosmic story being told through you as its vehicle. Here's what this actually feels like from the inside. You begin to recognize that your difficult mother isn't only your particular mother with her specific history and her individual psychology. She is the dark mother archetype moving through a human being, something ancient and transpersonal, expressing itself through the personal circumstance of your specific life. Your job loss isn't only unemployment, with its practical consequences and financial stress. It is a death-rebirth initiation. Your intimate relationship isn't only a particular romance between two specific people navigating their individual histories and wounds. It's the sacred marriage of opposites, the eternal tension between complementary principles playing out in human form, as it has played out in every human life in every culture throughout history. Jung wrote that the privilege of an entire lifetime is to become who you truly are. But who you truly are, he discovered, includes archetypal forces far greater and far older than your personal identity. When you awaken to this level, these forces become conscious in you, and you experience yourself as both the actor and the role, both the particular human being with a name and a history, and the eternal pattern moving through human life regardless of the names history assigns to it. You'll find yourself in an argument with someone you love and suddenly perceive that the two of you are not simply two individuals disagreeing about something immediate. You're enacting the eternal tension between fundamental opposing principles, the same tension that has generated every great myth and every great drama in human history. You'll face a serious challenge and recognize with sudden, quiet certainty that you are not just solving a practical problem. You are the hero confronting the dragon. And the outcome carries weight on levels that extend far beyond the immediate and personal into something that has always mattered. One of Jung's most deeply awakened patients described living in two films simultaneously. One film was her regular life, work, relationships, the accumulated ordinary texture of a specific human existence moving through historical time. The other was an eternal drama in which she was enacting humanity's deepest recurring patterns with every significant choice she made. When her father died, she said, she was not only losing her own father, she was experiencing the death of the father archetype in its full transpersonal weight. Her grief was both entirely personal and entirely transpersonal, simultaneous, inseparable, each dimension amplifying rather than diminishing the other. She was grieving for every human being who had ever lost a father, and they, across all of time, were in some real and non-metaphorical sense grieving through her. This archetypal awareness extends to the perception of other people's inner configurations and the forces moving through them. You begin to recognize who around you is currently being possessed by the victim, who is channeling the tyrant, who is embodying the lover or the wounded healer. You see that most human conflict is, at its deepest layer, not really about the individuals involved at all. It's archetypal patterns meeting and clashing through human beings who remain largely unconscious of what is actually moving through them.
This recognition generates a quality of compassion that goes beyond what personal empathy can produce. People aren't deliberately choosing to be destructive. They're unconsciously enacting ancient scripts that have been running through human experience for far longer than any individual life. Here's what Jung understood with a clarity that feels increasingly urgent. These 5 experiences are not isolated spiritual phenomena happening to random individuals for unknowable personal reasons. They are the symptoms of humanity's next great evolutionary development, the outward visible signs of something moving in the species itself, not just in individuals.
Each awakened person who moves through them is participating in what Jung called the collective individuation of mankind, the species-wide process of coming into greater consciousness, which proceeds through individuals who are willing to bear it. Synchronicities reveal a universe that is not indifferent, a reality that responds to consciousness and participates in its development. The transcendent function demonstrates a psyche capable of evolving beyond the dualistic thinking that has generated most of our collective historical suffering. Prophetic dreams suggest that time is not the simple linear progression we've been taught to inhabit unquestioningly. The ego self-restructuring demonstrates that consciousness is not confined to personal identity in the way we have assumed. Living mythologically reveals that individual human lives are expressions of universal patterns that have always been seeking fuller expression through us. Jung wrote that the spiritual crisis of the modern world forces an encounter with these experiences not because they are consciously sought, but because consciousness itself is evolving. And these 5 experiences are the observable symptoms of that evolution moving through the most available individual vessels it can find. The chaos, the meaninglessness, and the suffering that characterize modern life at its most intense are not mistakes to be corrected before the real journey can begin. They are the catalyst. They are precisely what is needed to break open the containers that kept these dormant capacities sealed. This is why there is no return once these experiences begin. You cannot unmeet synchronicity after living in constant dialogue with a responsive reality. You cannot return to either-or thinking after the transcendent function has permanently opened the possibility of holding opposites in the same hand. You cannot return to ordinary dreaming after receiving transmissions from the self. You cannot live solely as ego after experiencing what lies beyond and beneath it. You cannot see your life as a random sequence of unrelated events after recognizing the mythological patterns running through every chapter of it. Jung called this the irreversibility of consciousness. Each genuine awakening experience alters your psychological structure in ways that do not reverse themselves with the passage of time or the pressure of the ordinary world trying to pull you back. You have not simply changed your opinions. You have evolved into what Jung called modern man in search of a soul, but having found it, discovering that it is vastly larger, stranger, more demanding, and more generous than anything you could have imagined when you first began looking. This is genuinely isolating. You are inhabiting a different reality than most of the people around you. Not a superior reality, a more comprehensive one. You see everything they see, and you also see what they do not yet have access to. You experience everything they experience, and you also experience dimensions that remain outside their current range of perception. You are something like a person who can see color in a world where most people have only ever known shades of gray. You cannot demonstrate the existence of color to someone whose perception doesn't yet include it. But you know what you see, and you know it is real. Here, finally, is Jung's most important insight, the one that transforms profound isolation into genuine meaning and purpose. These experiences are not given to you so that you can live apart from humanity, elevated and comfortably separate. They are given to you so that you can serve it. Every person who develops these capacities becomes what Jung called a beacon of consciousness for the collective. Not through instruction or preaching, not through building a spiritual following or positioning yourself as a teacher above students. Through living, through the simple, daily, often unglamorous and unrecognized act of being someone in whom these deeper realities are awake and active. Someone who has become, as Jung said, what they were always meant to become. Jung believed we exist in a race between consciousness and catastrophe, that either enough individuals awaken to these experiences to generate a genuine shift in the collective human direction, or humanity remains captured in unconscious patterns that lead inevitably toward destruction. Each person who cultivates synchronistic awareness activates the transcendent function, receives prophetically in the dream state, restructures the ego-self relationship, and begins living mythologically. Each such person adds to what Jung called the sum total of consciousness available to the human species. You are not having these experiences for yourself alone. You are having them on behalf of everyone who cannot yet. If you are experiencing these 5 phenomena, if reality speaks to you through synchronicities, if you hold paradox without fracturing, if your dreams arrive as transmissions, if you live simultaneously as both ego and self, if you recognize the ancient myths moving through your particular personal life, you are not alone. You are part of what Jung saw as humanity's most important and most necessary transformation. Here's something to consider before you leave. In Jungian psychology, numbers are never simply numbers. They carry archetypal weight, symbolic resonance, a quality that the unconscious mind recognizes long before the conscious mind can explain. Numbers like 777, 11, and 520 have been appearing to people in synchronistic patterns at a remarkable rate. And if you're watching this video, there's a high probability one of them has been finding you too. Drop the number that keeps appearing in your life in the comments below. Not because it's a fun exercise, but because synchronicity works through connection. The number you've been seeing, and what it seems to be pointing toward in your life right now, might be the exact confirmation someone else in this community has been waiting for. Name what's been appearing to you. Remember Jung's words, the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. But beyond the shadow lie experiences that permanently redefine what it means to be human. Trust what you are experiencing. It is not madness. It is metamorphosis. To go deeper into Jung's map of awakening consciousness with Carl Jung Psychology, click the video on your screen now.